Okay. So we're going to pick up with our study of Habakkuk. We introduced chapter 2 last week as Habakkuk did what basically was all he could do. He would position himself to be able to hear from the Lord, and he would wait on God to respond to him. And really, whenever we're faced with calamities, and certainly what he was faced with based upon what the Lord had told him was a calamity. Habakkuk, your whole country is going into captivity, okay? Your whole city is going to fall. Your temple is going to be destroyed. So Habakkuk did the only thing he could do in light of that coming global, in his world, global catastrophe, was to position himself to be able to hear from God and to wait upon him. And then, in verse 2, the Lord replied and told him to write it down. Said, what I'm going to tell you, write it down, make it simple, make it plain, so that a person running could see it and understand it and allow it to be a guide for his life. And then he kind of moves forward, the Lord does, in verse 3. And he says, the revelation awaits an appointed time. So we talked about, what was all of that about. And it really looks like this was even helping him to put down, not only for the people of his day, but for the people of our day, that it is going to certainly come, the answer of God, the justice of God, the victory of God. And then he moves into a very great statement in which the Lord contrasts between the wicked and the righteous. Verse 4. See, and this is New International Version, see, he is puffed up. His desires are not upright, but the righteous will live by his faith. Verse 5, indeed, wine betrays him. He is arrogant and never at rest, because he is as greedy as the grave, and like death is never satisfied. He gathers to himself all the nations and takes captive all the people. So, the Lord opens this verse with an acknowledgement of the contrast, as I said, between the wicked and the righteous. And the description goes all the way down into verse 5. And it's almost as if the Lord is saying to Habakkuk in this, look, I know what's happening. Yeah, I understand what's happening in Jerusalem. I understand what's happening in Babylon. And I know both their attitudes. I know what they are like. I know how the wicked people are that are around you. And I know how the wicked people are that I'm going to bring as a judgment upon your land. I understand all that the Lord seems to be saying. But it's almost as if God personalizes his description. 7 times in these 2 verses, the pronoun he is used. He or him. Look at it again. He is puffed up. His desires. His faith. Wine betrays him. He is arrogant. He is greedy. He gathers to himself. It just seems like he's taken a group and all of a sudden personalized it. So, who is the he that he's talking about? Who do you think? Okay? Babylonians? Jews? Remember, Habakkuk opened the book with, how long shall I cry after you, Lord of injustice, and how the wicked are treating people within our own country. But who else might it be? All people. Okay. Who else do you think? Might think this could be the he, because it seems like he's talking about a nation, and he is. If he's talking about a group of people, and he is, why wouldn't he use they or them? Why did he use he and him?
Because the way this is written, it could be you. You can interpret it as yourself.
Could be you. Interesting. And I think it's all of these, including Satan. He. Because who is behind, ultimately, the wickedness that people do to each other? Who is behind the trouble that comes upon believers from the mass in general? Who is the he that is ultimately behind it? It would be Satan. And I think it's all of these. I think certainly this verse, this opening, really reflects, don't just limit what I'm talking about. Because whoever he is, whether it's from Satan to you as an individual, I know and I understand what's going on. I see it. I understand it. And God is letting Habakkuk know that he understands evil and who's behind it, as well as how it appears in all of its variations. And evil happens in almost innumerable variations. And one commentator notes this, and I thought this was an interesting statement. Whenever human beings rely on something of this earth, whether it be intellectual achievement or wealth, or military might, or aesthetic ability, and appreciation, or pride of birth and status, or even the ability to cope and solve problems and master the complexities of modern life, wherever confidence is placed in human prowess and not in God for the achievement of a satisfying and secure manner of living, there true life cannot be had. How does that strike you?
There's a lot of truth in it.
A lot of truth in it.
Because true life comes from the truth, and that's Christ. And anything we try to do on our own is futile. If he's not in it.
If he's not in it, it might look really good, but it doesn't stand the test before him.
And is it eternal?
Other comments? How does this? I mean, because this writer, this commentator, he covers it all pretty well. Whatever you're relying on for the satisfaction of life instead of God, there is not life in it. That's pretty strong. That's pretty bold. Do you agree with it? Disagree with it? Ma'am? Okay. I can make sure you hear me. Fear not, little flock. I can make sure you hear me.
Move in the middle, like the middle of the ring.
Wherever, put this in a speech. Wherever human beings rely on something of this earth, whether it be intellectual achievement, or wealth, or military might, or aesthetic ability, and appreciation or pride of birth and status, or even the ability to cope and solve problems and master the complexities of modern life. Wherever confidence is placed in human prowess and not in God for the achievement of a satisfying and secure manner of living, there true life cannot be had. I mean, that's a mouthful. If you ain't got it by now, you ain't gonna get it.
Mean it this time.
You mean it this time. Let me put some feeling into it.
That's true.
What makes it true?
That's just true.
When you say true life, what gives you true life? Christ.
Yeah.
So if he's not in it, then you are striving in yourself.
Mhm.
And there's no freedom in that because you're always trying to achieve. You're always trying to accomplish. Even when things are good, you're afraid you're going to lose good. See what I'm saying? Because you're striving in and of yourself and not allowing him to strive through you.
And I think that's exactly right. And this statement by this commentator, as powerful as it is, as stripping of our confidence in ourselves as it is, it really is true. And if we put ourselves into Habakkuk's place, he had just been told, look, the answer to your problem is losing everything. And in that sense, losing everything wasn't just your job. No, you're going to lose your country, you're going to lose your city, you're going to lose your temple, you're going to lose your community. You may even very well lose your life. The answer is stripping everything you've got away from you. Wow.
Yeah, but the scary thing about that is, if you read this, people say the Old Testament doesn't apply and all this stuff, but if you read this same thing, it could be applicable today.
Yes, it
And
is.
then also, you could have people that honestly, unless people lose everything, which we may be getting ready to lose everything, then you don't, it's just like when something happens and you see somebody at church or they hear from them a while, and then when things get good, they're not there anymore, or you don't hear from them anymore because they're back on their own and they can do it without God. So I can see that, because unless there's a tragedy, a lot of people don't turn to God. And then when there's a tragedy, they do.
Yeah.
And that's kind of scary because of the potential for tragedies to happen, and they are happening.
Yeah. Very much so. I mean, this when I read this and studying, I thought, man, this is strong. And so I quoted it just as it was written in the commentary. But the Lord goes on with this and states a difference that he knows as well. The righteous will live by his faith. And we've just stripped all of our ability away from us to really have true life. And now the Lord is telling this man who is facing, it's not, he can't see the dust on the horizon of the armies coming, but it's almost that close, literally. And he gives him this answer and says, I know the wicked, I know how they're doing, and I know who's behind it, but the just shall live, the righteous will live by his faith. What good is that? In other words, how does this statement, the righteous will live by his faith, how can this help those facing the crumbling of their world? Is this just, pie in the sky thinking that really doesn't do anything to actually help somebody? How does this answer help Habakkuk? How does this answer? Because as we talked about in the introduction to this book, this verse is used at least 3 times in the New Testament by the New Testament writers, primarily Paul, as a foundation to talk about justification and righteousness before God by faith alone. So this is a powerful verse. But if it's so powerful, what good is it? How does this help me in this election? How does this help me in my hurt? How does this help me in my state? or of things, condition.
It's all you've got.
It gives you hope.
Okay?
Well, you gotta forget that me part. You gotta start with it. Beyond just yourself.
Okay. How does this help? It gives hope. You gotta
That's the point of God's promises.
leave
right?
me out. And somebody else said something else.
It's
What
all
was it?
you've got.
It's all you
It's
got.
Ultimately, it's all you need.
Okay.
We don't often see it that way, but God gives us His promises for a reason. We can have faith in those promises and believe the truth of it, or we can sit in our circumstances
And Stu.
in fear,
Yeah.
fear or disbelief of those
Yeah.
promises.
Because can you imagine the people of Jerusalem when Habakkuk wrote this down and read it in the temple, which he probably did. Can you imagine the response that he got from the community? Hey y'all, God's going to destroy this place. Can you imagine the response? It's a wonder we don't know. But I would imagine several of them would want him stoned for saying such seditious things. So, if this verse is so great, what makes it mean anything to us?
Well, it's great as a believer, but to a non-believer, it's a bunch of words.
Okay?
A bunch of knowledge. When I'm sitting here thinking about you read somebody, that verse to somebody that's a non-believer, they're like, whatever, dude.
Yeah. No, I'm good. You can go believe all you want to, but I am going to get my AR-15 and I'm going to get my grenades and I'm going to get ready for an army that is going to sweep in like the desert wind and take everything in sight. But I'm going to use my little puny weapon and I'm going to stop it. Really? But that's what most people would want to look at. Not that I'm against AR-15s or anything like that. Don't get me wrong. But going back to our statement up there, whenever you rely on achievement, of wealth, or military might, yours or a country's, it ain't gonna work. But faith works. What good is it? It gives us hope. It takes you out of the equation. I like that. Who said that? By the way, I can't remember who said it now. Pope. Hoorah! So tell me a little bit more. What does this mean to you to say that? It's one of those inspiration moments. Is what it was. Yeah, it just came out. Yeah.
If you take me out of it, you have to leave it up to
Take
faith.
yourself out of it, you quit focusing on your trouble. How pitiable you are. Start,
How great God is.
you forget about your trouble. If you look around, everybody's got worse trouble than you got.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great statement. To take me out of it forces me to look to God. What good is talking about faith when there is an army on the horizon? It gives me hope.
On that leave me out, though, one really humbling lesson that my liberal daughter just made me learn this week. But you also have to take out that your knowledge, your education, what you know, because sometimes you get so focused on that, and I am right, and I am right, and I know this, but you know what? It doesn't even matter. If you boil that down to an incident that's right and wrong, you have to go with the godly version no matter what the And then you have to go with what is right and wrong, and you raise this child to know right and wrong, and you just have to back on up on your educated me answer. And that is like a humbling experience.
Yeah.
And and it wasn't even that I was right or wrong with her, it's that I realized that for a long months and months, I've just been wrong. Even though maybe I'm right, I'm wrong in the way I presented something. And that's hard to take with me out, either knowledge or everything, and boil down to this Bible in this world today. Because the Bible answer is different than what's right and wrong.
It's different than what society and convention thinks is right and wrong.
I've heard a lot of people discuss the election and the complexity of the fact that there's not a lot of choice here.
There isn't any choice.
But one of their argument is basically I guess from the conservative side, is that you have to vote the party platform regardless of what, because the party platform is, no abortion, homosexual marriage, those various things that are clear in God's Word that are part of His platform. Now, I'm one who also believes that politicians often use that to manipulate us too.
Oh, yes.
So,
Oh, yes.
I mean, there is a fine
It's a
line
good
there.
buzzword to stir up
Sure.
an evangelical in order
It
to get
happens
them to
on both
vote. Then they
sides.
forget
Both
about it
sides,
once they
yeah.
get in. Yeah. And it's and going back to taking the me out of that for Scripture, even in talking about the election, as we talked about politics, we did a study here some time ago about this, is that, really, it doesn't make a difference which party's in, as far as ultimately who's behind
There
it,
you
because it all falls under the control and the realm of Satan, whichever party is there. And we have to remember this when we're disappointed in whoever wins the election. If our party gets in there and they don't follow through, we have to remember that the person behind that party to begin with wasn't on God's side. Principalities, powers, rulers of the darkness of this world, Ephesians 6, is who we wrestle against. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood. It's not just a Hillary or a Trump thing. We wrestle against the powers behind. And that's what we have to keep in our minds, to keep us steady, keep us from us being overwhelmed. Because Jesus said it, we talked about it, I think, last week. In Luke's Gospel, chapter 21, he said that people would be fainting in fear because of all that is happening in the world around us as we get near the end. And are we there or not? We are, and we are getting even deeper into that consternation of what do we do? How do we do? How do we just make it? The answer: the righteous will live by his faith. And as simplistic an answer as that sounds, this is the answer that can help every believer know how to manage even when the Babylonians are at your door. And they were coming. There was no doubt they were coming. How do I manage? By faith. Now, he says several things here that bolsters this. This answer is good because it tells us that it will never be the puffed up, those with desires not right, those who lead by wine, or the arrogant, greedy, those that are never satisfied by his lust for more, nor the one who gathers all the nations and takes captives all the people, that will ultimately survive and win. It is they who are the righteous who lives by his faith. It's none of these that he just listed in verse 4 and verse 5. none of those that have that as the defining characteristic of their life, that will ultimately succeed. It will be the righteous who are living by faith. And God goes, yes, He goes to the big picture in these verses. And we have to look at the big picture. We have to look at the big picture. What's that?
The last thing you wrote up there, what's that say?
You can't read.
Which one?
The last.
Here's for a believer.
I'm sorry.
One word. Yeah, there you go. Ever heard that word?
You mean you can't read my handwriting? I mean, what a shock that is, I can't read it sometimes myself after I've written the thing up on the whiteboard. God goes to eternity versus the moment. And yes, there are service victories won by evil. Yeah. Even to the destruction of a country. He's telling Habakkuk, the Babylonians, who are nowhere near righteous, in any stretch of the imagination, are going to punish the unrighteous in your country. That's a small victory. But like the scientists like to say, we've heard this on science channels and all the things, well, that's just a blink in the eye of geologic time. That victory is just a blink in the eye of God's time. So when we think about what good is the answer of faith, we have to go to the big picture. And that's big picture. Big picture. That's, just in case. I mean, because it doesn't even look like that, and I'm standing right up here at it, so I'm going to have to tell you. But it's also interesting because this word, faith, could also be translated as faithfulness. And it's important for us to understand this point with this. Its use here helps us to see why Paul used it in the New Testament to show a right relationship with God. Habakkuk's faith wasn't just, stand there with your arms folded and just wait for the bomb to drop on you. That wasn't what he was simply telling Habakkuk to do. The Hebrew word behind this reveals that faithfulness, and this, I'm going to give you another quote from a commentator, is a way of acting that flows from inner stability. It is belief that results in behavior that illustrates our inner attitude toward God. So, the just shall live by his faith. You could put fullness, because how you live comes from how, I'm blocking it all together here, how you believe. I know you can't read it. Just one of those days, y'all. You can't hear and I can't write. I mean, got to be Monday somewhere. Our inner attitude. A person who believes in God's revelation of himself is going to live. Big picture, he's going to live forever, eternity. And from verse 6 through 20, God is going to expand on this idea of living from faith in contrast to those who choose to live not by faith. Even in the midst of turmoil and waiting on God to ultimately set it all right, the answer of living by faith helps because it gives to us as a believer the standard, the center from which to act, decide, plan, and respond, especially the victory over evil. And it's important to think, how do I act in this election? Let your faith and your faithfulness to God help lead you to the right decision of what you should do. How is this helping my hurt when I'm hurting more than I can even explain? Faith in God. And I talked with someone yesterday, and they were talking about a situation they had, and I go back to that passage. I can't remember how often I have gone to this in my history in looking at this phrase. The words that Paul gave in Thessalonians, we sorrow not as those who have no hope, as the others. We look at it different. And even when it hurts too much to talk about, we still look at it and feel it different because of our faith in God. How we live comes from how you believe. And the point with that is that our behavior is before God, not just before others. Yes?
Excuse me, Bill. I'm not going to judge anything like that. Everybody's got a measure of faith. Like you and I was talking before, there's 4 kinds of faith. Little faith, great faith, fallen faith, or no faith at all.
Yeah. And we have to act on our faith. You know, as Jesus said it to his disciples, you know, when he told Peter and he told the others, remember he was on the boat, he was asleep. They said, don't you care that we're about to perish? Well, he knew they weren't going to perish. He woke up, calmed the wind, and he said, oh, you little faith. You got to act on what you have. You have faith. You need to act on that. Rely on that. How does this answer help? It gives me something to lean back on, if you will. It gives me something to rest in. That when I don't know what's going to happen in the election, and it doesn't look like a good choice anywhere, what am I going to do in my hurt? In my condition, in my state of things? I just got word from the doctor. I just got this. I just lost my job. I just go right on down the line. In all of this, what helps me to have a center? What helps me to have somewhere that I can feel like I'm on solid ground and I can know how to move from there? Because it's there that we find true life. Faith in God brings to us life. We are justified by faith, not by works, lest any man should boast, Paul says. It's not what we do that's going to help us to feel good about all that we can't do anything about, that is in the realm of the workings of God and His providence and all that He has set up. What can we do? Trust. You know, it's simple, but it's complicated, but it's simple. And all that we do, as you carry out your responses to all of these and others that comes into your life, always remember that you're acting before God. It really doesn't make any difference what anybody else thinks of that. You answer before God. And this is where that faith comes in, because if you don't have a ground, if you don't have a center of faith, you're going to act based upon what you feel everybody else expects of you, and how society wants you to act, and how people around you want you to feel, and how people around you want you to do in answer to all these and others questions of life. But we behave and we live in light of the fact that it is before God. Psalm 51, I think it's verse 4, where David's talking about his sin with Bathsheba and all that happened with that. In that passage, you know what he said? Against you and you alone have I done this wrong. Now wait a minute. You just ran around with another man's wife. You just had him killed by conspiracy. You have lied. You've done a lot of things. Yeah, but it's really, I'm guilty before God. And as we can see, in politics, if you want to go there again, Go back 30 years till now. Seems like that's where everybody's going with this. People can justify what they do in any number of ways and cause you and me to either say, well, or we can say, yeah, or we can say no. But people can justify it. But David, when he realized that his life was lived before God, he said, against you, I've done this, that you might be just when you judge. He recognized, I might be able to fool or convince and change a lot of people's minds about a lot of different things. But Lord, you know. You know. I can't fool you. And I think that's why I say that, to remember, faith and faithfulness is not about how it just looks to people around us. It's important, but it's not about that. God sees it. This is what he's helping Habakkuk understand. I know what's going on in Jerusalem. I know what's happening. I know how the people of Jerusalem, the leaders of Jerusalem are treating God's people. I know that. I know how the Babylonians are going to treat them. But I want you to understand, Habakkuk, the righteous, those who I also see are in a right relationship with me, are there because of faith. And how that is transforming their life. And it's a powerful verse. No wonder, Paul used it at least 3 times in the New Testament for the center of some powerful arguments about our relationship with God. Now the Lord begins to expand upon this initial response in verses 6 through 20. And I don't have time really to get into that because it's already 1:15. But he's going to give us some other items out of verses 6 through 20 that will help us in this commitment of living by and out of faith in the Lord. Powerful. And we're going to look at them next week. Good discussion. If anybody wants to try to come up here and decipher any of this, good luck. Help yourself to some of the groceries. It is very good.